Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
Thanks for the warning, Ryan. Appreciate it. Get 2 seconds before the segment started. Today's guest, including Thomas Drance, standing by, brought to you by the Bayside Oceanfront Resort. An exciting spring and summer season awaits at the Bayside, including a soon-to-be-completed outdoor pool, fully equipped with ocean view cabanas, alongside the number one ranked coffee shop in Parksville, the Bay Cafe. Call 250-248-8333 now to book your reservation and mention Donnie and Dolly. You get 10% off your nightly room rate. Also, be sure to grab some Donnie and Dolly merch now on sale at the Bayside. You know, I'm getting a lot of pushback on Delaney's OK Tire and Langley inbox.
What?
Me saying that, you know, Vancouver fans, you'd think they'd be pulling for Florida amongst the Final Four NHL teams because of Luongo. Nick from Vic pointing out, well, what about Dallas and Jim Nill? I thought Dolly would be rooting for the 82 alum, and we mentioned Pete DeBoer being a former Canucks prospect. But Jim Nill, overtime hero against Chicago, 1982, now in charge of the Stars.
And Jim Nill was tough as nails. Boy, he could drop the gloves. And Jim Nill, 82 team, my favorite team of all time. I don't care what anyone says. Look at Ryan shaking his head. Ryan, the 82 team, you had to be there in 82 to understand how the whole city was.
Well, he wasn't born yet.
I know that, but he shouldn't laugh because I said the 82 team. That's wrong of you.
You love the 80s. Taylor loves the 90s. This is what happens.
Yeah. We'll find out what Thomas Drance is. I'll tell you this. Thomas Drance from The Athletic, he used to work for the Florida Panthers.
Oh, right.
Thomas Drance joining us now from The Athletic. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Guys, wasn't Colin Campbell also an overtime hero during the 1982 run?
How would you know?
Yeah, well, he was definitely part of that
history.
team. Yeah,
he scored the game winner in game 2 or 3 against the Kings the night after the fire alarm went off. Yeah, and the 82 team.
Listen to that, Ryan. You see that? Thomas respects history.
But I know my history. Anyway, my point is that the 1982 team after Colin Campbell's involvement in the 2011 Stanley Cup playoffs, I think they've renounced their right to be regarded as the heroes of 1982. It's like, no.
That kind of went out through the door. Colin with the big bubble.
Sorry, Jim. Jim Nill. He's done a great job, though.
He has. Well, okay, let's start there then. Forget Florida for a second, but I was going to mention Colin Campbell and the old Stan Mikita bubble helmet.
Oh, yes, his helmet.
But you refer to the Stars' Game 7 effort against Seattle, a 2-1 win, on Twitter as championship caliber stuff. How come?
It was a close game, and Game 7s often are. It was a nervy game. It was a fast game. Honestly, I thought it was entertaining as all get out. I was riveted watching the game last night. And yet, if you look at the balance of scoring chances and the quality that Dallas was generating, the stress that they were putting on Grubauer versus what they were surrendering, I mean, it was a clean night in front of Jake Ottinger. Clean enough to eat your supper off. It was a really stellar defensive effort in which Dallas was also generating almost at will against a Kraken team that's been able to tilt the ice really effectively all season long. You know, the Kraken still played well. They still managed to generate their down low activity. Their speed still played through the neutral zone. It was by no means a blowout game. It was a really strong effort from the Kraken. It just kind of didn't matter because Dallas was completely in control all game long. And that's sort of what you need to do. They pitched a perfect game with their season on the line. And I think that's, the sort of thing that always gets my attention at this time of year. Bodes very well for Dallas in a really tough test against a Golden Knights team that you'll remember they beat in the Western Conference Final back in the 2020 bubble.
Thomas, take us, you worked in Florida for the Panthers. Take us into what kind of hockey city that is. And, I mean, Don and I talked about, does anyone care there? Just give us a little insight into hockey in Florida.
It's tough down there. There's no question it's tough. I remember, for example, we were going to name Alexander Barkov captain on a Monday. And that Sunday I was down in South Beach and hanging out with some friends and getting ready on my way back, approving some of the creative and on and looking forward to hosting this big media day. It's right well before the Heat season. You know, there was no Dolphins, like there was nothing that mattered. And I was like, okay, we're going to have a good turnout. This is going to be great. And I'm driving back and I hear on 790 The Ticket, South Florida Sports Talk Radio down in Miami, Dwayne Wade plans to announce that he's going to play one last season. Right. And I'm just like, oh, great. Like, that's it. I'm not getting inches in the newspaper. I'm not having any television stations turn out. Like, this is so, you're very much backseat in a lot of ways to some of the other sports brands down there. And the list isn't necessarily what Canadians might expect. It's like, number one is the Dolphins with a bullet. The Dolphins are very much like the Canucks are locally, where like you turn on sports talk radio and it's like they'll do 2 hours on like the safety depth of the Miami Dolphins, right? And then number two is the Heat, and it's the Heat are obviously a championship team, hugely successful. Generational fans are beginning to form in South Florida around the Heat, despite how transient that community is. And it's like, then you have like U of M football, right? And like the NCAA football. And then you sort of have like preps, like the high school football is a really big deal down there. Some of the high school basketball is a pretty big deal down there.
Wow.
And, sort of then you get to kind of like the Marlins, and then you get to the Panthers. And so, it's a big lift down there, especially because the arena happens to be in Sunrise, which is on the, borderlands of the Everglades. Like literally you can see swamps from the office windows at what used to be called the BB&T Center, but is now the Fla Live Arena. And so, it is a challenge, but all of that said, like in the Panthers' backyard up in Coral Springs and stuff, like there are real hardcore fans. There is, a season ticket base that is like relatively vibrant, family based. A lot of young people play hockey. You're getting people like Shane Gostisbehere, like Andrew Peak, who are Florida Junior Panthers that have come through, grown up around that team. I think you're even beginning in that small pocket in the interior to have some sort of generational support, but it's really hard to make inroads in Fort Lauderdale and certainly in Miami, given how far the arena is away. That's really sort of been one of the big challenges. I think if the arena was downtown and the team was successful, because that's the other thing. When I was down there, we were at the tail end of a run in which, the team hadn't won a playoff round since 1996. It had been 20 plus years since the team had won a playoff round when I was working there. The success that they've had helps a lot, but I do think the arena location remains like a fundamental existential challenge for the franchise, and one that, I think is going to need to be addressed significantly if the club's going to be viable and put inroads, like put sort of the stamp required to have a real longevity as a sports franchise in a major metro area, just as opposed to the suburb where actually the team indexes pretty well.
Thomas, we're talking prospects today for the Canucks because Lekkerimaki signed in SHL. But the Hockey News had the Canucks ranked 28th out of 32 teams for prospects. They got a long way to go.
That's no surprise, right?
Yeah. How do they change? Well, and then you trade a first and a second, Well,
in a draft that a lot of veteran talent evaluators are saying is the strongest since 2015, at least in the first round. That's tough. That's tough. I mean, you watched last night, right? So last night, the Stars are like the template team, and Tom Ghilardi came on your program, about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, and talked about his distaste for rebuilding. Yeah. And when Tom Ghilardi expresses distaste for rebuilding, I think it's fair to take it seriously because the Dallas Stars are like the template for the successful retool now, right? I mean, they've made misguided contract commitments to older players, guys like Jordy Ben and Tyler Seguin, and yet they've managed to continue to have success and keep coming, despite, the fact that they haven't done a tear it down at any point and have made some unwise commitments to guys who are a little too old and have still found a way to put it all together. Well, what did it take to do that, right? Number one, they had the 2017 draft, the 2017 draft where they win the draft lottery from 11th and snag Miro Heiskanen 3rd overall. So a ton of lottery luck, improbable lottery luck at that. And the sort of lottery luck, by the way, because you can't move up to 3rd anymore, that no longer even exists. But they were able to take advantage of that. But it wasn't just that. They then trade up into the 1st round and take Jake Ottinger in the 20s. So they got a star goaltender, without question, the best goalie remaining in the Stanley Cup playoffs, guy who started 62 games, the only workhorse still standing, and he was great last night again. They get him in the 20s, and then they get a superstar level player, although he's been a little bit snake bit through the playoffs in Jason Robertson, in the 2nd round, like several picks after where the Canucks take Cole in. That's essential. Like, you need, if you're going to retool successfully, to hit on these types of players, like well outside the top 10. Wyatt Johnston scores the game winner, right? That guy was picked in the 20s, right? Like, and he's already in the league. They've got Logan Stankoven coming. He's going to join the team next year after he, competes credibly for the Memorial Cup with the Kamloops Blazers in a couple weeks. And he's a really good player. Like, he's a really good player. They've drafted extraordinarily well. And that's been key. Like, their ability to get Robertson, Ottinger, Heiskanen, Johnston level contributors with more to come into the lineup has allowed them to burn the candle at both ends, to defy the natural gravity of the NHL system and continue to actually get better, even as their sort of old core players, get older, become bit contributors, and become increasingly inefficient in terms of the cap spend allocated to them. It's a really neat trick that Jim Nill has pulled off here. He deserves a ton of credit, but you have to think about the strategy of it all, right? Which is, if you want to try and replicate the Stars, first of all, you're going to be relying on an awful lot of luck. You're going to be relying on nailing, draft picks and a few things that are probably somewhat outside your control, but also you're going to need the draft capital to do it. There's no way to be the Stars if you're trading draft picks. Those draft picks need to be star players for you 3-4 years down the line if you're going to pull off what the Canucks consistently say and clearly with their actions are intent on pulling off. Like, by their own standard, the model of what they're trying to do here, the Dallas Stars, you can't do better than that. The model of what they're trying to do here requires them to approach things differently than they have over the course of the past year, which is, certainly something that I find a little bit frustrating, but more than that, just I think it should clarify the challenge ahead for Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford. They need to nail this 11th overall pick at the very least, especially given that they've decided not to take 3 kicks at the can in the first 45 picks of the 2015 NHL entry draft.
Totally agree on that. Thomas, thanks so much for this, sir. We'll talk to you next week.
Anytime, gentlemen. Be well.
You bet. Thomas Drance, former Florida Panthers employee, now working for The Athletic.